Hello everyone, this is Victor Dantas here from the Zero to Hero Academy. Over the years we have helped multiple professionals either get into the Power Platform market or some of the seasoned professionals within the industry up their game within the low-code technologies. And we are here to announce that we have a special program coming up between March 19th and May 30th. This is the Power Pages and AI Zero to Hero Mentorship Program. Join us, click on the link, access the lessons. You know how we do it. Live lessons on Teams, and then the recorder goes up to YouTube and you can follow if you are in different time zones, but we prefer it to join it live. Connect, ask questions. So go ahead, invite your colleagues, your dad, your mom, your grandpa. Let's everybody join the fun. All right, we'll see you there. Take care. That's it. All right, I will pass the mic to Franco here. Franco is a friend in this community. Not only he's an expert within Power Pages, but he's an expert in the whole stack. You find lots of his articles online and some videos, some posts on LinkedIn. He's always willing to contribute to the betterment of this community. And like everybody that has joined the this mentorship, I have the pleasure to call him a friend. So, Franco, thank you so much for donating time. The floor is yours, my friend. Take it away.
Lovely jubbly. Right. Well, first of all, if for any of you just getting into Power Pages now, you lucky people, what an awesome time to get in. When I was getting started, there was maybe Victor's blog, Nick Hayduck's blog, Nick Dolman's. That was just about it. The documentation was shocking. We didn't have CoPilot. AI was a twinkle in ADX Studio's eye, perhaps way back then. So I've challenged myself in the last couple of days to get stuck into building some decent templates without writing any code whatsoever. So it has been a learning curve for me as well. Hopefully you think the result's been worth it. I've been surprised, to be honest, how far I've gotten with this. But watching back Victor's first two sessions, what I found was a few examples of where we'd kind of get an idea of what the code should be from CoPilot, but we kind of consider it throwaway. Where I can see there should be some fetch XML, there should be a for loop, for example, but maybe it's not using the right fields or something like that. So I thought I'd try and show you an approach first where we can get that exact output that we want, or very close to it. So what I've done as a starting point, in fact, Victor, could you make me a presenter, please? Victor, I don't know if you can hear me, but I'm not. No, now I can. Nice one.
Sorry, I was muted. Yeah, you are presenting now.
Cool. Right. So the flavor of AI that I've chosen to show is GitHub Copilot, and the reason for that is that I don't have a Copilot license in Microsoft 365. This I've been using for quite some time, but there'll be a lot of overlap, I'm sure. So as you've probably seen already, context is everything. When we're trying to get some help with Copilot, it's not autopilot. So we want to give it a clue what we want to work on. So the first thing that I'm going to do, in fact, is get some code generated for me a different way. I'm going to say, come to Advanced Find. And in this example from the Scottish Summit website, I've already done a query to say, get me all the sessions that are active, that are for this particular event, with the columns that I'm interested in. And I'm going to download that fetch XML. So we've probably all done this before. Anyone that's coming from a model-driven app background or a dynamics background, build an advanced find query, export the fetch XML. I'll show you why I'm doing that in just a moment, but I'm going to tell Liquid that there is some fetch XML coming. So I'm going to open a fetch XML tag give it a name because I know I need to reference that shortly. So a fetch XML query called sessions query. Pasted that code. So CoPilot's suggesting other things for me. I'm not interested in that for now, thank you. So I'm just going to hit escape. So far, I'd have a query, nothing output on the page, and that's where I'm going to ask for CoPilot's help. So I can either right-click and choose CoPilot, start an inline chat. That's the way that I prefer to interact with CoPilot. And you'll see we got the keyboard shortcut of Control and I. So I'm going to say, let's give this a whirl. I want to loop over records from sessions query. So this is where I'm thinking that extra context should be enough to get some more useful results. So loop over that and output each one of those. I'm getting specific now. So I know that the portal that I'm working on is on Bootstrap 5.2. So not just any card, not just any Bootstrap card, but Bootstrap 5.2 card. Let's see what we get back. I'll be honest, I've got high hopes. I'm expecting something pretty much on point here. Almost correct, but not quite. So I'm going to tweak that, in fact, and say, and I know that should be results.entities. But I've actually got naming as I would expect. It's got the exact fields that I'm interested in. So I'd say that's a pretty good start. I want to add some further detail to that. So within my for loop, I'm going to select that card. And that's the markup for a Bootstrap card. And I'm going to say, I'll accept that first of all. And I'm going to, I've selected the bit that I want to change. That's a useful hint to CoPilot. And I'm going to say add a flush list. Flush meaning that it's not got padding and space around it. And I want the start time, the end time, and the room that that session's in. So rebuilds that code for me, and it's got the exact columns that are from my fetch XML. So I think that's a real big plus for having provided that extra context. So it's not going to be perfect. So far, I've only had to fix one word that you've noticed. There's another here that I'll have to do. But what I think for now is I'll just drop that into a web template and see how far that's got us. It's going to be pretty ugly and unstyled for now, but bear with us. We're going to refine this as we go along. Right, so for having written no code, apart from my fetch XML tags, I've got a card for each of these sessions. So I think that's a pretty good starting point. And if this existed when I was first starting out in portals, goodness knows where I'd be up to now, because I spent ages fighting with Liquid. Right, so one gap that I saw there is that the room wasn't outputting it. I know that that's a lookup field, and from experience in Liquid, I can either output the GUID or the name. So what I'm going to try is I'll select what I want to change, open the CoPilot chat. That was with Control I, and I'm going to say, in plain English, like I probably would to a colleague, we need to output the name from this lookup column. And it's got that exactly right. So if I'd have said maybe I want to output the GUID from this lookup column, it would have said .id, but what I want to show is the user, what I want to show the user is that friendly version, the name. Now, perhaps to style this a bit better, what I might want to do is include some icons. So as you may well know, we get the Font Awesome icon libraries as part of Power Pages. I want those for the start time and the end time. So what I'm going to say is add some Font Awesome solid calendar icons. So I am applying some knowledge that I've got outside of this session here. So I knew already that Bootstrap 5.2, I knew that I'd already taken a look to see that the component that I wanted there was a flush list group. And I also know that the font that I want is not just any Font Awesome, but the ones that come free is a Font Awesome solid font, which is why I've chosen that one. There we go. That's looking good to me. I'll accept that. And perhaps for this one, I want to add a Font Awesome solid location icon. So I think that's pretty neat that I've not had to, I'm not bothered about the comment there. I don't know why it's added that, but I've not had to even go and search for the icon to say which one to use. It does the job of that. It takes care of where it would be useful to drop that. So just put that ahead of the label, ahead of the value. So yeah, that's pretty cool. Happy with that. So I think now's a good time to go and paste that into my web template. Take a look again. And please, if you feel like I'm going too slowly and patronizing you, do say so. I'll speed things up. Yeah, again, I think that's a pretty good starting point. I've got some styles pre-made. So what I'm going to do is add a class to the card. I'm going to say add the tartan class. This is Scottish Summit after all. In fact, sorry, I'll do that in VS Code. So the next thing I'm thinking about is I want to make these responsive. So at the moment, regardless of how I scale the screen, they're always just full width, every card. So what I probably want to do, like I would on the live site, is maybe say adjust it based on how much screen space there is. So it's either full width, or it's half width, or it's in thirds, depending on how wide that browser is. So what I'm going to do is say, select the card, talk to CoPilot. This prompt's going to be a bit longer, but it's all plain English. I'm going to say I want to make each card 12 columns wide. So again, I've got some inherent knowledge there. I know that the Bootstrap grid system is based on a maximum of 12 columns. So I want each card 12 columns wide at mobile res, 6 columns wide at medium res, and 4 columns wide at desktop res. Obviously, you can tweak that for whatever your UI element is, but I think for cards, that should work pretty well. Typos don't help too much. So what I'm expecting is that's going to apply some classes to the card. Yep, perfectly happy with that. So that's saying that it's going to be 12/12, aka the full screen. Then on medium resolutions and above, it's going to be 6/12, aka half. And at large resolutions, it's going to be 4/12, aka thirds. Exactly what I asked for. Pretty impressed with that. And then I know from experience, I want this to be within a container and I want it to be within a row. I don't necessarily have to know what those classes are, but it's just, I know that from experience with Bootstrap. So I'm going to start chatting to CoPilot again and say, wrap these. So you can see I'm giving it some context. I'm selecting what I want to be edited, and I'm using words such as wrap or add or loop. So I'm going to say wrap these in a container and a row. And in fact, I'm going to say in a Bootstrap container and a row. Yep, I'm happy with that. So cool again that it's applying it in the right place. So it's saying all of those cards will exist within one row, which is within one container. Perfect. Now, something else, if I just go and take a look back at my page, the descriptions are hidden, which isn't the most helpful, but some of them are super long. So like that one, hundreds of words long. Maybe all I want to show to start with is just the first 200 characters. So what I'm going to do is select that description field, start chatting with CoPilot and say, I want to truncate to only show the first 200 characters. Not quite right. I'm not impressed with that one, actually. I'll try that again. No, sod's law, it had to be. It worked for me in practice, but not on the live session. So it's almost the correct format, but not quite. So yeah, it knew that it's a liquid filter. The liquid filter is called truncate, and I've just had to tidy that up, fix the syntax to say the 200 characters. I saw we had a hand up. Should we pause there for any questions? So I'm struggling to hear. Could you pop that in the chat, please?
So there's a question from John Franco.
Right, yeah, I can see that. Great stuff. Yeah, so hi, John. Thanks for joining. Yes is the answer. So I do use quite a bit of GitHub Copilot in day-to-day work, but it tends to be usually when I've hit a stumbling block. So the reason for that is, I think as I've mentioned on other sessions we've attended together, John, that I've invested a lot of time as a consultant in building up my own library of code snippets that I still find the quickest, because I know I'm not having to go in and tidy up and correct things. But absolutely, if I was just getting started now, I'd be getting GitHub Copilot to be doing the first draft of everything, then maybe say try and learn why it's done that. So if I maybe select all that and say explain it to me or document it, there's so many time savers. Yeah, so that for me would have just been the ultimate learning tool. And in fact, probably what I would have done. Back in the day, I remember rifling through all the out-of-the-box web templates to see what liquids in use there, what HTML, what CSS. I'd be getting that into VS Code and saying, right, explain it to me. Use this to teach me liquid. GitHub Copilot, last time I checked, I think it was about 20 quid a month. But I mean, when I'm comparing that to a consultant rate, that for me is the amount of hours saved in a month. It soon pays for itself. You can also use this in VS Code for the web, I believe, but pardon me, when you would do that compared to using Power Pages Copilot, I'm not sure. So it'd probably be worth trying to do these same kind of commands that I've shown here, these same kind of prompts, but in Copilot for Power Pages, if you're lucky enough to have that license. Right, so another question come up from Alona there. Would we, if you're not going to be the ones writing code, is this session beneficial for you? Possibly not, in all honesty. It might be worth seeing how little code I have to write. Yeah, I'm essentially writing prompts here, and Copilot is doing the work. But no offense taken if you decide that that's not going to be relevant to you. But cheers for the questions. It's always nice to keep it interactive. But yeah, I think I've got a pretty cool starting point there. So let's see how far we can push this. So on the live site, what I've got is a transition to try and invite a bit of interactivity. So when you hover over a card, it scales up a bit. So for that, I'd be moving out of liquid and into CSS. So let's see if GitHub Copilot can deal with that. So I'm going to select all that. Again, I'm going to chat to Copilot, Control I, and say that I want to add a transition. So again, there is some background knowledge going into that. I know that what I want to apply is a transition. So add a transition so that on hover, each card scales up 5%. Again, pretty awesome guess. So it's added it as CSS, which is precisely what I would do. It's added the transition to the card and then the transformation on the hover, precisely as I would do. So I'm going to lift that, shift that into my web template. I'll stop doing the copy and paste quite so often, just so we speed up a bit. But I'm genuinely wowed by this. So even if you in the audience aren't, I've got to say I am, because I've been there and learned it the hard way. So will Copilot be helpful in writing CSS and HTML? Absolutely, yeah. So I'd probably start it with something like, give me a 2-column layout in Bootstrap 5 HTML, and that would take care of that for me. So now we're starting to get something that looks a lot closer to the real world portal. So that's because I applied that tartan class. It's done the transition for me. I'd probably tidy it up a bit, but we're nitpicking now. I mean, I think that's a pretty awesome start. So obviously I've got to push it a bit. If you've been to any of my sessions before, I always have to tempt the demo gods to put me in my place. So what I'm going to say now is, like on the live site, I want to have a modal that opens up with that extra detail. So the first thing I want for that is that I want a footer for the card, and I want that to contain a link. So let's see if we can make Copilot earn its money tonight. So I'm going to select a card, chat to CoPilot, and let's think how I'd word this. So I want to add a footer to the card containing a link. And I want that link to launch a Bootstrap 5.2 modal. I'll show you in a moment where I know all these components from. It's all there, easy to find on the Bootstrap site. So dot launch a Bootstrap, but launch a Bootstrap 5.2 modal. And I want to pass it some information. So on the Scottish Summit site, you might have noticed that when the modal launched, it knew which session it was about. So what was the title of the session, the description, the start time, etc. So in fact, I'm going to nip over to the Bootstrap docs and show you what I'm aiming for. So I'm going to go for a modal. That's what I want. But I want it to dynamically set the content. So I don't want to have to say specifically this title, this description, those buttons. So I want to vary the content like this, so that here we're using the exact same modal, but it's providing different output. That's what I'm aiming for. Whoa, John's just checked out the price of GitHub Copilot. It's $10 a month. I think it'd be absolutely bonkers to choose not to go with that, especially if you're doing paid work in this. Right, so I'm going to say I want to add a footer to the card containing a link that launches a Bootstrap 5.2 modal, and I want to pass I do get the feeling I'm pushing this now, but let's see how we go. So I want to pass the session title, the description, start time, end time, and the room as data BS attributes. BS for Bootstrap, that is. So I'm essentially saying I've gone and looked at what should be there from Bootstrap. And apologies if I'm laboring the point here. So what should be there according to Bootstrap docs? And I can see that it's got these data BS, whatever I want to pass, quite literally whatever. So I'm going to say, I'm going to see how CoPilot does with that. All right, so we've got a footer, good start. It's got the attributes to open a modal with Bootstrap, that's great. It's setting the title for us with Liquid, setting the description for us with Liquid, start and end time with Liquid, and the room. So I reckon that's pretty awesome. So I'm going to accept that. It doesn't do everything yet. So it's got all the links ready for me to consume with either JavaScript or whatever I choose the output to be. So what I think would be a useful next step, that's saying launch a modal. The modal doesn't actually exist yet. So CoPilot gives a hand with that. Cheers for the feedback, John. Yep, I like the code replacement thing and the inline chat. I much prefer that to writing it in comments. So especially with Liquid, because it's actually very wordy to open and close a comment. So I'm going to say create a Bootstrap modal. So I'll put the session details. Might take some trial and error, but let's see where that gets us. I'd say that's a good start. Let's start with that. So some things that I know are required for making models work is they've got to have an ID, and that ID's got to correspond to the link. So it's got that part, correct. That's great. Let's see how we're looking so far. So I'm going to say, let's copy and paste that into the template. Yeah, good question. Could we get it to comment the code so it's kind of teaching us as we go? We'll certainly give that a try. I think, in fact, I may be wrong, but I think that's the document this feature rather than the explain feature. But yeah, let's definitely give that a whirl. And that would be perfect for me for the end of every project, really, because as I've mentioned in quite a few sessions before, I invest a lot of time at the end of each project on making sure I get the maximum out of it. So as I see it, we get two outcomes from every project. We've got what we build and what we learn, and the more we can solidify what we learn, the better. So yeah, that'd be a great thing to say. Looking back at that code in 3 months, in 3 years, would I remember exactly what it did? If I've documented it, 100% I would. Oh, sorry, if CoPilot has documented it, 100% I would. Right, so it's not fully complete, but it's a decent start. So I've got my modal. So the last thing I would want is some JavaScript to say, populate that modal with the details for that session. So can we make the final leap? So in fact, that's pretty impressive. I didn't even write a prompt for that one. So CoPilot is assuming that's what I'm going to want to do next. I'm going to hit tab to accept that. Looking at the brackets and stuff, it looks like it's not fully complete. In fact, I think it is, other than a closing script tag. So that I'm actually blown away by. So let's see how that's looking. If this works, I think I might ask Microsoft about a job doing pre-sales for CoPilot. Oh, sweet. I'm well impressed with that. And so that functionality actually took me a while to build on Scottish Summit, and this is just taking the grunt work out of that completely. So I think the only thing that I'm going to add to that, cheers Cheryl, cheers for the feedback. So yeah, the only thing I'm going to add to that, there would be some further styling. As you can see, some of that is in black, which I wouldn't want it to be. But I'm going to change the style, the size of the modal. So maybe say for the card, sorry, for the modal, I'm not going to cheat and select the bit that I know it should be on. So I'm going to select the whole thing and say, make the modal extra large. Cool, it knows how to do that. This is actually getting pretty close to feature complete. I think the final thing I would add to this, compared to the live site, is perhaps to say I want the modal content to be in 2 columns rather than 1, but that's really nitpicking. Awesome. So I'd done some of this. It's not the prettiest set, but I'd done some of the CSS in advance just so that you didn't think that it had to look horrible. But yeah, I think that it's pretty damn impressive. I'm loving that. I'm loving the questions. Keep them coming. So I think, yeah, solid question there. But if we were new to Power Pages, what kind of time difference would there be to feature completion with and without CoPilot? It's tough to say because I probably spent, if it was me now not new to Power Pages, the times are about the same, or maybe it would be, without me talking over it, it would be 10 minutes with CoPilot compared to an hour doing it from scratch. That's still a sizable saving, but compared to when I was getting started with Liquid, I just couldn't get it going. So what that meant for me was, even though, let's say, the successful part would have been a couple of hours, actually I lost weeks to it. Sometimes there were days where I'd code and I just didn't get an output. I didn't get an output because it failed, and that was it. So yeah, I'd say if you are starting out of scratch and you don't know necessarily, you've not quite got the hang of which bit would be Liquid versus JavaScript versus CSS, then yeah, I'd say you are potentially saving days and weeks. Yeah, cheers, Cheryl. But yeah, absolutely, better to be transparent about it. So the question from Mary about where that class came from. So tartan, that's actually something I'd already created in the CSS. So if I was to remove that, you see it's got a completely different style. So what I'd done ahead of time is created that style. I'll show you what it represents in the inspector. So it says cards that have got a class of tartan get this particular background image and gradient, this amount of rounding, that amount of padding. In fact, I already had the transition on there as well, and that font color. But what might be useful, if we just again take a look at that explain feature. I'm going to create a new CSS file. Tell CoPilot, first of all, let's see the difference between explain and document. So first of all, CoPilot, explain this. Yeah, I'd say that's pretty comprehensive. So it's telling me that the selector is for elements that have got classes of card and tartan. Perfect, yeah. So that's very different to this, which would be cards that have got a child element with a class of tartan. So that's useful to know. And then, yeah, it explains what each of the properties are for. All good. But yeah, great point from John before that's kind of throwaway. It doesn't document it for me. So let's say this time I want CoPilot to generate the documentation for this. Yeah, so that's cool. So I get a CSS comment containing all that. It gives me the file name, but that's useless for now because I've not saved it. But yeah, now I've got that in a durable way. So let's see how well that does for my whole file now. That I think it's fair to push it, seeing that it's risen to the occasion for everything else. So I'm going to select the whole thing, ask it to generate my docs. I think that's pretty solid. And then I guess I could go back into specific chunks that I want to. So let's say Not sure what the for loop does. Let's say we want some documentation for that particular part. Oh yeah, that's pretty comprehensive too. So yeah, that's where we could do that. What's not ideal about that though is they're not liquid comments. So it's great that I've got it to reuse, but actually what I'd need to do if I wanted it at that point in my code rather than in some separate documentation is I'd wrap it in some liquid comments. And in fact, why do that? When I can tell GitHub to do it. Wrap this in liquid comments. So, of all the things to fall down on, it was a comment. How bizarre. Right, I'll discard that. But yeah, it would be an opening comment tag. In fairness, I think we got to, I've probably confused it a little in the sense that I've got a mishmash of liquid HTML, JavaScript, and CSS in the same file. But yeah, I'm thoroughly impressed with that. All right, let's catch up on the comments. So the questions. So yeah, that's where the tartan came from. It's some separate CSS, but probably useful to see that you can take that scaffolding that we get from Bootstrap and still apply a totally different style on top of it to make it on brand. Yeah, I think that this is a value of coming live to the session, I think, because these questions are gold. So for designers, what should they consider versus not consider? Aaron's question. I would say that there's still definitely room for designers on these projects. They add a lot of value, but I'd be either having them involved at the start to say generate us some wireframes, some Figmas of what each key page should be or what each user journey should look like. And then perhaps I would break that down to say, well, this translates well to an out of the box list, so we'll go that way. This maybe could be represented by a carousel or an accordion or a card from Bootstrap. In terms of that's the right kind of interaction, and that's the correct bit of UI. And then the additional design, like in this example, I'm not claiming it looks fantastic, but let's say that the designer had specified it's this Bebas font for the title, it's this Poppins font for the body. Maybe they've done a nicer job of the list group and the button. That's where I would say they come in, and it's likely that those designers themselves have got equally as awesome tools as CoPilot to say, well, take my Figma, use AI to generate CSS from that. Yeah, great question again from Aaron. Prototyping, is it worth mocking up? For me, in reality, what I do with each project is I will typically start by building the MVP. So I'm prototyping and getting that in the user's hands, the client's hands early and often. But yeah, in terms of, I'd usually start a project by building what I'd consider the minimum viable user experience. So things like the forms over data. So navigating from a list to a form to subgrids, that kind of thing. Then maybe style up a list of components with Bootstrap and the client's branding, and that is kind of we'll do the gap analysis based on that. But if I'm coming onto a project where they've got dedicated UX and UI resource, I'll totally leave it to them. And my job is really about making that dynamic in terms of feeding in the Dataverse data. A question from Scott. I think this is a really good one in the sense of, so can we use GitHub Copilot to make the basic forms have better styling? I think that's a great point about the context. So that is something that I would definitely do on each project. Not necessarily with GitHub Copilot, but I would be styling the forms. And an approach I'll often use, as I mentioned on previous sessions, is that I will augment those out of the box components where possible. So I won't just always throw custom UI everything. It would be, how far can we take the out of the box list? How far can we take the out of the box basic form? How far can we take the multi-step form? But what I would suggest is give GitHub some context. So I would go and view the source of my page. I don't think I've got any basic forms to hand, actually. See if I can find one. Maybe if I apply to speak, that's going to be a multi-step form, but I think I can demonstrate the same point with that. Yeah, so this is what I do first. This is an out of the box multi-step form, so the markup's going to be much the same. So I'm going to view that page source. I'm going to put it all just in a new HTML file to start with. So I'm going to give it all that context before I try and do anything else. I'd also do the same with JavaScript. So maybe show that on the next session. But yeah, then I might say, add some style tags. And let's think of some changes I might want to do to the basic form. Maybe I want to indent those checkboxes. They're going to inspect those. Yeah, I want to indent those 2 Ms, maybe 2 Ms or 20 pixels. Let's see what that comes up with, just as a starting point. That's a very simple example, but that it can do for us. Maybe if I want to add some styling around each section, what I'm doing here inspecting is seeing what constitutes a section. So I've added that as a section on my form in Dataverse. So maybe I want to say, and add a shadow to the field set. It's going to be an ugly looking example, but just to explain what I'm on about. Let you know what the starting point would be. So tripped up a bit and putting the multiple style tags in, but I'm going to pop that in the inspector. See how that looks. It's going to look pretty ugly, but it's going to prove the point that it is a valuable thing to do. So we've got the shadows around the field sets. The padding, there's probably something that has got higher specificity in the CSS, which is why I'm not immediately seeing that. And then checkboxes, that I didn't do the greatest job on, because again, there's probably something that's more specific. So that is something that you do end up fighting with CSS. So in fact, I'm going to say if it's got a span with a class of checkbox. We do have, I believe, so Donna Sarkar mentioned that we can have CoPilot within the browser dev tools as well. That's another context that's coming up. I believe that's only at the moment for console errors and things like that. But it'd be cool to see that in future, absolutely, to have that expanded. But what I'm going to say now is instead of inputs of type checkbox, I'm going to say spans with a class of, what was it? Checkbox, funnily enough. No, that's the one bit that doesn't want to work. So I'm not quite got that right. But yeah, absolutely. So if you wanted to maybe apply a color scheme or different fonts or whatever, I'd say it's not going to do the whole thing for you, but a bit of back and forth between you and the browser dev tools, you using GitHub Copilot, it can at least give you a decent start. So question about ALM, how do we move Power Pages changes from dev to other environments? That's much improved these days. We've got various different options. I would say the most accessible, the one I tend to use the most often, is the Power Apps command line, the pack CLI. So in fact, got some examples. But here for the Scottish Summit site, I've got here, I've put this in the terminal in VS Code to say I want to create an authentication profile for that particular environment. I want to select which to use. This all happens super quickly. I'll show you as an example. So let's say I want to list all the auth profiles. Here are all the ones I've got on my machine. I'm going to say I want to get the Scottish Summit one. So there's only something like 6 to 8 different commands, so it's not too onerous to learn. Then I want to set, so I've got the right environment. I want to see which portals there are on that environment. So I'm going to say Power Pages list. So here are all the portals that are in that environment. I want to download one. I don't remember that with the GUID off the top of my head. But that's a command, Power Pages download. Where do I want to download it to? Which of the websites, because we can have multiple portals per environment. And is it on the new data model or the old? MV2 is the new data model. And that, go ahead, pull down all those customizations. I can open that up. So if I see that in the Explorer in VS Code. Then I can go to everything that I would in the portal management app or the Power Pages app. I've got access to all the web files, which is super helpful as well, including the attachments. For any pages, I've got the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript all there available to me as well. So that's my download. And then as I save anything, the manifest keeps an eye on anything that's changed. And if I was to re-upload to the same environment, it only pushes what I've changed and ignores the rest. And then it's finally that upload option. To upload the changes to another environment, all I would do is first connect to that other environment in the CLI and say I want to upload from that path. But there's many other options. There's deployment pipelines, there's Azure DevOps pipelines. This I consider my MVP. So again, when I'm thinking what's the best in terms of timescale and budget, what works for a one-person team like me, then I'd say that does work. A good question. Do I use any other AI tools for Bootstrap, HTML, CSS, or graphics? Midjourney I use a lot. I've not got any great examples, I don't think, on this machine, but yeah, I use Midjourney a lot. I don't find it useful for portal output necessarily, but in other elements of my professional life, I use that. ChatGPT I will use occasionally for if there's a complex scenario that GitHub Copilot isn't quite delivering on, then I'll use ChatGPT, see if it gives me a better or different starting point. A question from Alona, are we able to import Figma designs into Power Pages for prototyping? No, we're not, unfortunately. I wouldn't be surprised if it came in future, seeing that we've got it for Canvas apps. What I do think is very feasible, though, is what a workflow I've used on a lot of projects is that I'll start from a Figma file, export the CSS from Figma, and I repurpose that on Power Pages. So it's not a straight lift and shift, but it's definitely a good time saver. A question from John: if we're inspecting the page, do we get to see the server-side liquid? No, we don't. So again, because that's pre-rendered or pre-calculated, however you want to think of it, you don't get to see that. But everything is so transparent. If for a site you're working on, at least, you've got access to go and look in all the web templates, including those that come out of the box or that come in any of the starter templates. So something that I commonly did when I was getting started, as you saw there, that I've used the fetch XML snippet, I've used the for loop, I've used assign. I'd just be doing searches to say, show me all the web templates where this particular bit of liquid is included, and then just go and try and work backwards from that. Whereas now we've got that extra step that we could say, lift it and shift it into VS Code, tell it to explain it, tell it to document it. And then final question, how do we know whether liquid's present or not? I guess in reality, we don't, not without looking in the back end. Well, I've really enjoyed that session. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate we've gone a little bit over time, but is that all the questions covered?
I believe so, Franco. This is awesome, and there is a lot to unpack here. Like you said, if we had to do it by hand, yeah, you're looking at hours maybe of effort there. Mostly because some of the commands in Liquid, or be it JavaScript, or even some of the CSS notation, you don't memorize all this stuff, so you always have to go back to snippets and sometimes documentation and things to make sure that you get the right output. But Copilot and your knowledge of the technology, it's a perfect combination. So I loved it. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome. Well, thanks very much, everyone. I'll catch you Thursday. Is that right?
Yes,
For the
sir.
next one.
For round 2, we'll see you all on Thursday. Take care, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks again,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks very
You're
much.
most welcome.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye bye.